Hello, everybody. I'm Deacon Tim Sullivan, and I'm joined today by Caleb Harlan, and I'm going to be interviewing Caleb. He is an incoming Catholic, so to speak.
Right.
His background is in Protestant ministry, and he's recently decided that he wants to become Catholic. He's going through the formation process now, and he's got a great story. So I'd like to share that with you. So, Caleb, thanks for doing this. Who are you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been good to know you over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a longtime Tulsa resident. I went to school at the University of Tulsa, and for the last, I'm a husband of almost 12 years, a father of 4 kids, and over the last couple of years, I've been a Protestant pastor in journey to the Catholic Church. So I've been an ordained Presbyterian minister for the last 6 years and worked in the Presbyterian Church for 10 years. And yeah, I'm excited to be with you and share a bit about my story.
Okay. Well, Caleb, maybe we can start with a little more information about your faith background as a child, as a
Yeah,
student, and all of that, and then how that all morphed into actually being in ministry.
yeah. So I grew up around ministry. My dad worked for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And so I grew up going to summer camps and very involved in our church. My dad then went on staff at the church. And in high school and college, I was the rebellious pastor's kid who kind of wandered away from the church and the faith and made a wreck of my life in some sense. Um, and it was the Presbyterian Church my senior year of college that kind of lured me back in, and God used that in a powerful way in my life. And really, there was something about it, both the community and the message I was hearing, and so I began. That was 2011. I soon thereafter met my wife, my now wife, and we became really active in that church and served in any way we could. And 4 years later, God was working some sales jobs here in Tulsa, and God, about a 9-month process of um, calling me into the church and going to seminary. And I went to Reformed Theological Seminary and worked as an intern at the church while getting that degree. And I think God really used that time to help me see the benefit of applying theology, because there's a lot of in the circles I ran in, there was a lot of doctrine heavy, a lot of knowledge, a lot of we know the right answers, we know the Bible really well, and yet a lot of hesitation to or maybe just challenge of figuring out how to apply it and how it helps people, how God invites and leads us to a life of abundance and joy and fulfillment. And I think working at the church while doing this heavy doctrinal study, I started to see and really just gravitate towards how does this make sense? How does my Christian faith make sense? And that's really what I've been about over the last 6 years. I then joined a college ministry, and my denomination sent me back to my alma mater at TU, where I worked with a college ministry called RUF, Reformed University Fellowship, and help these students in this very transitional era and time of their life take the faith of their childhood or faith of their parents, or maybe coming in cold, and learn what it means to know Jesus and follow Jesus and live as a witness to Jesus in their life. And so I ran this ministry and pastored these students for the last 6 years, and then we'll chat a bit about my journey away from that into the Catholic world. But I've really enjoyed my job. It was really good at my job, and it was a fulfilling job to help others understand Jesus and see how the church and Scripture and a godly community can really make a powerful change in someone's life.
Okay. So, Caleb, what triggered your curiosity about the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it began and continued through just a relationship. And I have always found that to be true. God's word done and understood through relationship with God's people is the most powerful testimony to change. And it was this man, my counterpart on campus. He worked at the Newman Center. His name is Gerald Murphy, who became my friend, and we would talk about parenting and marriage and ministry on campus, and eventually Catholic theology. And I'd ask him all the questions, and why do you guys do this, and why do you think this? And he was very patient and gentle, and he was not trying to win me over. He was asking good questions, and sending me things to read or listen to. And then we got pregnant again. My wife was pregnant again with our fourth child, and it was really like this final 6 months of her pregnancy and first 6 months of my child's birth, where she'd go to bed just exhausted from carrying a baby and nursing a baby, and she'd go to bed at 8 o'clock, and I'm a night owl, and I'd stay awake till 11 reading and listening to all the stuff that Gerald got me hooked on. And I really started consuming all sorts of interviews and debates and podcasts. Started reading Catholics. I got into church history. I mean, there were a couple books that were really, oh gosh, if that's true, that's a really big deal. And so it maybe intensified and sped up over the last year of my life, to a point where I'd say in the spring of this year, I was doing Protestant ministry and preaching every week and discipling people one-on-one, and there became to be a level of inconsistency, and my conscience just became more and more heavy, of I don't know if I agree with what I'm saying in some of the particulars. And it became really, concerning for me, and started to talk to people about it, some of my peers, my boss, some people in my denomination, and eventually got to a point in April where I couldn't do it. I knew for sure that I wasn't going to be able to come back in August and preach this with a clear conscience. And there was enough about the Catholic Church that I understood and agreed with, and the rest of it was like I'm willing to accept. That's kind of, so I made the call, made the jump, and that's where the story gets a little bit ugly. But yeah, that's kind of what led me. There were a couple of kind of a long relationship, and then an intense year of real study and reading and convincing.
Right. So basically, you lost your job, campus ministry at TU, and so now you've got to replace that with a family of four to take care of, 4 children and a wife.
Yeah.
So back to some of the issues you researched as you described it. I remember you saying something about you looked at the history of worship in Christianity going back in time. What role did that play?
Yeah, part over the last 10 years, I've actually been to Clear Creek Abbey a couple times a year, and I remember going to their mass and just finding it unique at best and weird at worst, and then realizing, gosh, for 800 years, this is what worship was. Globally, every Christian in heaven today worshipped like this, understood this is that the Eucharist and the sacrifice of the Mass is the central part of worship. And for me, I was in a denomination that was highly intellectual. Most people in the Presbyterian world are highly intellectual, educated people who are there for the sermon. And the central part of worship is the sermon, and therefore the central duty for most Presbyterian pastors is to really nail down and create a clearly articulated and exegetical kind of verse by verse type of sermon, because that's where grace really is received. And just really realizing a bit of the inconsistency that we had with global and historic worship was eye-opening. And so that was one thing. And I read several conversion stories. I think born fundamentalist, born again Catholic, on being Catholic, and Home Sweet Rome. I listened to some interviews from Dr. David Anders, who was a former Presbyterian minister who converted. Actually, he converted during his doctrinal study of John Calvin, which is interesting. And then it was losing faith in a couple of these primary things that I really believed, which particularly sola fide, this idea of faith alone, and sola scriptura, and at the same time understanding and coming to agree with the authority of the church and the oneness of the church, and just how that made sense. And then the Eucharist was a huge deal for me. That was the thing where, like, if Jesus is speaking literally in John 6, this is a heavy teaching, which is why a lot of people walked away.
Yeah.
And I realized I was one of those who kind of had been walking away, like, I don't think you mean what you mean. And I think he means what he means. And so I was willing to kind of lay down my protesting swords and walk into the church, where we'll officially be confirmed in 25 days.
You know, I've only been in a Presbyterian church once in my life. It was in St. Louis.
Yeah.
I was with my oldest sister. She and her husband went to this Presbyterian church, and the minister, in his homily, his sermon, he talked about how much he liked the Eucharist, and he said, "I'd like to do it more often," but he said, "If we did that, we'd be Catholic."
Yeah.
And we can't do that, so we can't be
Right.
Catholic, so we can't do that. And I just thought that's kind of weird.
No, I mean, that is so true. And that sentiment is shared by a lot of Presbyterian pastors of, I want to do this, I want to tap into this historical practice, but that's too Catholic. And what they mean is, that's too Catholic, it would scare out my congregation, because being too Catholic is bad.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, Presbyterian is a highly liturgical denomination. And it's also extremely anti-Catholic in a lot of ways. If you go read the Westminster Confession, there are two places. One place it says the Pope is the Antichrist, and another place on its section on marriage, it says that on the section of becoming equally yoked, it says that Christians are not allowed to marry idolaters, infidels, or papists.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
you would be unequally yoked. And
Yeah.
And you have to accept everything the Westminster states as an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. And so in its nature, there's a lot of hesitation and, I mean, outright, disagreement and fear. And so it was scary to kind of come out like, hey guys, I think they might be right on some of these things.
Yeah. I know a number of Protestants who want to pursue a more historical approach to worship, Christianity, and all that. So a lot of them have signed up with an Orthodox Church, and their main motivation is they're not going to be Catholic. That is not going to happen. So they choose the Orthodox Church, which is kind of strange because most of them have an ethnic flavor that doesn't fit a lot of people. I mean, it's a Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, or whatever, and they have a lot of ethnic type, events and things. But here are these people from Oklahoma who they're not Greek, they're not Russian, but they're there, and the main motivation is they want the liturgy, but they're not going to be Catholic. I mean, that's not on their radar at all. Yeah. So what are you doing now to prepare to actually enter the church?
Yeah, we have been meeting with Father Castle, my wife and I. He's been able to kind of meet with us separately, realizing I got connected with the Coming Home Network in December. And they have, and so I've been meeting with a man named Ken Hensley a handful of times, and I've listened to just about every one of their podcast episodes. And so they have a really robust education podcast where I'm like, so I came in, like, I kind of learned my way and read my way into the Catholic Church, and Father Castle realized, I don't think it's necessary for y'all to kind of start at ground zero, though we might do that after we come into the church, still kind of take part in the whole process in the fall and spring of next year. But to meet with him and trying to just wrap our head around and get our feet under us of what it looks like to live a Catholic life. And some of these, whether that's the prayers or the feast days. We've read, there's a book, I think it's called 40 Signs of Life, or Understanding Catholic Customs by Scott Hahn, that we've been reading and understanding some of the unique Catholic things that go on, so that we can enjoy them and do them and participate. We've read some books on what's going on in the Mass, so that we can participate. I have a Roman Missal and do the daily readings, and we've been attending Mass every Sunday and a couple times a week. And yeah, so right now it's kind of this integrating into some of the unique differences of the Catholic Church, and also just still following Jesus, and still praying and still talking to others about Jesus, and just being a Christian. And so yeah, anyway.
Yeah. We had at St. Bernard's, we had an elderly woman who didn't want to really become Catholic, but her son had become Catholic. And so she accompanied him to a Bible study that's held every Sunday at our church. And after 6 months of attending this Bible study, she blurted out at one of the sessions, I've been coming here for 6 months and I haven't really heard anything contrary to the Bible yet. And
Yeah,
everybody just
right.
kind of laughed, like, you're not going to.
Yeah, right.
No, that's what's so
Yeah.
weird is the Catholic Church is actually the true biblical church. But
Yeah.
Protestants, many Protestants don't accept that. And then
Yeah.
I work with RCIA at St. Bernard's, and we have so many mature Protestants who know the Bible in a certain sense. They've memorized a lot of it, but they don't understand a lot of the passages that support the Catholic understanding of particular issues.
Yeah.
But then now they read it and they think, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
and
How do we miss it?
they'll say there's no going back, because the
Yeah.
Bible's
Right.
Catholic.
Yeah. I think that was part of the huge kind of emotional, personal change in our life was finally going to Mass. I'd been reading about the Catholic faith for 3 years, and we had still never been. In my whole life, I'd never been. And I'm like, there's 4 Bible passages, or 4 readings in this service: an Old Testament, a Psalm, a New Testament, and a Gospel. Like, I thought we were the Bible people. That was more scripture in that service than I've ever experienced in any Protestant service. And so I think it created in me, though, a bit of naivety, because when I kind of came out to my presbytery, I expected there to be a bit more understanding and acceptance, because I had arrived at a place where I'm like, y'all, there's nothing terrible about this like you might think. And some of the differences are a bit more than semantical, but they're really not that different. And it just, there's a level of, ignorance, or just a misunderstanding, or a lack of desire to research and read and understand from their perspective. And so they kind of, freaked out and did not agree. But yeah, you're exactly right. Like, wait, y'all teach the Bible, and you're actually teaching the Bible. Well, yeah. So anyway.
What a shock. So
Yeah.
what have been some of the reactions from your family, friends, others in the Protestant ministry?
Yeah, family and friends have been really supportive, which has been wonderful. We've got awesome Christian parents, both of us, that are both longtime married and faithful followers of Jesus. Probably a little bit of don't quite understand, and that's okay. They're in their own place, and God's leading them in their own ways. And our friends have been very supportive. There were some extreme responses in some of the some Presbyterian pastors and colleagues and friends. I think some of it was just the shock, because there was a lot of, I don't know how to talk about this. There were a handful of trusted people that I was walking through this process with for the last couple of years. And so a lot of them were shocked. Some things that were said, I heard, you've been deceived by the devil. One pastor said, I'm scared. I want to come to Tulsa and teach you the Bible. Another said, I want to come to Tulsa and evangelize you for the sake of your children's souls. One man, in quite the irony, said, you have fallen from grace, my brother. And if you know Calvinistic theology, that's actually what they don't believe. It's impossible to fall. God's
Right.
grace is irresistible,
Right.
and you will be persevered to the end. But
Now, once you've been elected, right?
yeah, right. So what he really means, I guess, if he's going to be consistent, is I've never been a Christian. But yeah, there were some extreme responses. I would say the predominant response has been, I don't quite understand Catholics, but it's just another denomination. What's the big fuss? That's kind of how I would say how most Protestants understand it, this transition. And then I also hear there's lots of faithful Christians in the Catholic Church and a lot of unfaithful non-believers in the Protestant Church. And so they're recognizing a level of truth of there's people going through the motions and their faith means nothing to them in both camps. And there's really, devout followers of Jesus in both camps. And I'd say that's true. So yeah, I'd say generally it's been more positive, minus a couple of extremes. And then our students, there were 120 students in our ministry, and most of them probably don't quite get it and are a bit sad. There are a couple of people that were ticked off, but also a lot of people that are like, man, it's a compelling story of you taking a big leap of faith and falling where you felt since the Lord was leading you. And so I think it spoke louder than words to a lot of people, which was really, which is good and impactful. I'm glad that's the case.
Yeah, you touched on something in your comments just now, that there's the Catholic faith, what the church teaches, what it does essentially with the Mass and sacraments and things like that. But then it's also a culture, which, and that's a different issue than what's in our toolbox. So that's something that requires an adjustment too, because it's a different culture aside from the religious beliefs and principles and all of that.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of good in it. I would say mostly good in that. And it was something I was drawn to because I think without realizing it, most Protestants are more, and again, like I haven't been in the Catholic Church enough. And I also know this is not just a Protestant problem. This is a human problem and a sin problem. But, the secular American world is a powerful culture that without realizing it, you begin to really swim in those waters and become more secular than you are Christian. And so Catholics, what I've noticed, at least in the beginning stages of our Catholic life, is there's a transition away from accepting kind of the values and ideas and worldview of the American secular world and into the Catholic world. And then there's also the faith component. Like a good example of this is something like icons or something like praying the rosary. Like a very simple way of talking about this with Protestants is like, well, it takes 30 minutes. I promise you there's things you do for 30 minutes that are worse than praying the rosary. Like, you're participating in these secular liturgies in ways that you don't understand. You're doing something with your heart and your mind for 30 minutes. Whether that's watching a sports game or binging a Netflix show, you're doing something that's forming you in some way. And I promise you, whether you agree with Mary and what's going on in the rosary is better than that. And so you can kind of play that out in a lot of ways where it starts to deflect and put the defenses down of a lot of just hesitation and that people have. But yeah, you're right. There's a Catholic culture, and I'd say that the con of it is that what I would say most Protestants, or maybe not most, but a lot of Protestants have seen the cultural Catholic and then caricaturize the whole Catholic world as just these cultural, ritualistic people who are going through the motions, doing the things, and don't know their Bibles and don't know anything about their faith. And what we've come to find is like, that might be true for some, but there is this whole devout world in the Catholic Church that's like really, really attractive. And that even goes back to the first question of like, man, it was Gerald as a man, but also Gerald loved Jesus, and these Catholic focused missionaries at TU loved Jesus, and these Catholics we began to know loved Jesus, and it threw us for a loop because we're like, I thought you all were just these cultural people who just
right.
did these
You're not
things
supposed to do that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, thanks so much, Caleb, for spending this time with us. I think our
Yeah.
listeners have benefited from hearing your story. Just want on their behalf express our admiration to you. Celebrate your courage for making this decision, which is very challenging in so many ways. Your way of supporting your family is now going to
Yeah.
have to change in a way that's
Yeah.
going to be very challenging, and you don't even really know what the details of that will be yet. So uh, we offer our prayers for you, our support for you, and again, thank you so much for being with us. And we know that you're going to be contributing to the growth of the church in some significant way, and so we're grateful for that. So thanks very
Well,
much.
yeah. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me on.